Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. It's Max Blumenthal. Going to be joined soon by our friend and UK correspondent covering the transatlantic axis of evil, Kit Klarenberg. Quick announcement. We have just had our account restored by the Five Eyes affiliated financial transfer company known as PayPal, which means that since we are live streaming on Rumble, we can actually access our earnings there. They had been holding hostage our earnings on Rumble, as they are doing for many other podcasters, several other podcasters. PayPal has seized money from other outlets like Consortium News and Mint Press in the past. They have banned our colleague Wyatt Reed after he traveled to the Donbass and was nearly killed in a Ukrainian howitzer strike on his hotel. And we've been restored, and it's thanks to, number one, the investigation I was able to carry out with our friend who is an Australian citizen from Iran who donated $40 to us that was flagged in clearly discriminatory fashion by PayPal. Nasrallah Abbasi, thank you so much for contributing, your insights and own experience after being flagged as some kind of dangerous bad actor by PayPal. And number two, thanks to all of you out there, our supporters who raised hell about this and had our back. They restored us, but that doesn't mean we're going to be using them. We're working with another company that's more trusted. We're able to kind of like get them on the line. They know who we are. They know what we're about. They're called Give Butter. And, when you support us at the support tab at the top of the Grayzone, that's the company that will be transferring your donations to us, which helps sustain our work and sustain the work of Kit Klarenberg, who's going to be joining me to discuss the latest Epstein files drop, which is 3 million new files, emails, recordings, phone calls. It's honestly overwhelming. This is one of the harder episodes to prepare. I don't really necessarily know where it's going to go, although I have some vague parameters. And Kit is going to join us first to discuss the earth-shattering revelations in these Epstein files about labor lord Peter Mandelson, who was in many ways the architect of New Labor, the neoliberal project to take over labor and drive it to the right, destroy Jeremy Corbyn. And now it appears that Keir Starmer's government is on the verge of collapse over these new revelations. I haven't been following the UK as closely as I should, but UK media is completely focused on this, 100% focused on this from what I've seen, at the expense of everything else that's happening, being on the precipice of war with Iran, renewed Israeli bombing in Gaza. So Kit is going to help us unpack this from, I think, a uniquely critical angle. And so welcome, Kit Klarenberg, to the Grayzone stage. Great to see you. Kit is speaking to us from an unknown, undisclosed location somewhere in NATO territory.
Indeed. Thanks for having me on, Max.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Let's see. Peter Mandelson. You're going to have to tell everyone who he is. A bulletin was just sent to the British press, to Ipso, on behalf of Peter Mandelson, I guess. This was like a secret notice that has been published. And his representatives of Peter Mandelson state that he does not wish to speak to the media. He requests that the press do not take photos or film, approach, or contact via email, phone, or in person. No request for comment. He's not going to comment. Tell us, just summarize this scandal for us, and then tell us why it that Peter Mandelson is such a significant figure and someone who has not exactly been reluctant to comment in the past, has been the subject of many previous scandals, but this one might be the final blow. So what's happening and who is he?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first things first, I think this is quite sensational as far as scandals go. And I've actually been somewhat pleasantly surprised by the focus that the British media is paying to this. Of course, there's a lot of rubbish about how Epstein was a Russian asset, which is, just completely ludicrous. But the point is that the media has been quite viciously going for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the former royal, and Peter Mandelson. I strongly suspect that they're sacrificial lambs, that both of them have already been kind of thrown under the bus anyway. But I mean, Mandelson's particularly interesting. So for viewers and listeners who are lucky enough to not be familiar with this god-awful person, he's a kind of like this unflushable turd in British politics. He has been hovering around at the highest levels of the Labour Party and engaged in left-wrecking from the mid-1980s onwards, kind of on and off. He was Tony Blair's close confidant and aide. He was a minister in Tony Blair's government. He had to resign twice due to corruption allegations. He returned under Gordon Brown after he entered the House of Lords as a life peer. It was this period from 2008 until Labour lost the 2010 general election that has caused the most controversy in terms of his relationship with Epstein. Because number one, of course, Epstein was convicted in 2008 of child sex trafficking. Mandelson always claimed, when their bond was exposed in 2019, he claimed that I had no contact with Epstein after his arrest, which was a barefaced lie. Now, the contact that he had with Epstein, on top of like very kind of perverted back and forths with Epstein, including making lewd comments about Andrew's young daughter Eugenie, which is just deeply creepy. At the core of the scandal is the fact that Mandelson was handing sensitive information, including completely secret, private, classified government communications, on to Jeffrey Epstein. And this included advance warning that the British government was going to nationalise the banks following the financial crisis, which is something that Epstein could have profited from, or know people who could have profited from. He handed on information about the fact that a bailout was about to be handed to Greece long before it was announced. He boasted about how he got Gordon Brown to quit personally. He kind of forced him to stand down after the 2010 general election. This is completely legal. It's a breach of the Official Secrets Act, of the Ministerial Code, of conduct in public office. You're not meant to do this. It doesn't typically happen. Particularly sending this information to like a private citizen like Epstein, leaving aside any consideration of his criminal past and indeed present. I mean, Epstein continued unabashed after his arrest and prosecution, and jail time, which wasn't really jail time at all, was no deterrent. Now, so Mandelson is in very serious trouble. But as you mentioned, by extension, so is Keir Starmer, because Starmer appointed Mandelson to the position of British ambassador to the US in February 2025. Now, towards the end of 2025, there was a series of revelations which which demonstrated that Mandelson had been lying about his relationship with Epstein. And then now there's been this flood of like 3 million emails in which Mandelson features quite prominently. It's clear that Epstein loaned or gifted vast sums of money to Mandelson and Mandelson's partner. As I say, Mandelson was passing very sensitive private information onto Epstein in secret. It is kind of inconceivable that the British Security and Intelligence Services didn't know when Mandelson was nominated for this post. It caused a lot of controversy, as it was, and that's just based on publicly available information about his bond with Epstein. So, I mean, this is pretty bad, and it reflects absolutely terribly on Keir Starmer, because there have been numerous attempts to rebrand Starmer, and one of the kind of core propaganda messages about Starmer is that he's very sensible and wise, and also a nice guy. And I think he's pretty amply demonstrated that he is a complete and utter scumbag. But complicating matters further, and this is something that hasn't got very much media interest, is the fact that Morgan McSweeney, who was kind of this Rasputin type figure for Keir Starmer and was involved in all of these operations to neutralize the left in Labour, like whether that's permanently banning people from being members on bogus grounds of anti-Semitism, or he set up Morgan McSweeney set up a website called Stop Funding Fake News specifically to take down the Canary, which was this kind of pro-Corbyn left-wing website and was getting an enormous amount of traction. Stop Funding Fake News basically crippled their business model and they had to massively downsize. So that was a kind of key form of support of Jeremy Corbyn that was just shattered as a result of McSweeney's kind of covert conniving. But Morgan McSweeney is himself a kind of key acolyte of Mandelson, was kind of taught in the dark, dirty arts of politics by Mandelson, who during the 90s was widely known as the Prince of Darkness. Make your own conclusions about why that is. That Morgan McSweeney remains a very powerful and influential figure in British politics. And interestingly, Starmer's initial response to these revelations about Mandelson was to say, oh, well, I'm considering firing Morgan McSweeney because of the close bond between McSweeney and Mandelson. I might add as well that a large proportion of the Labour cabinet are themselves Mandelson acolytes, and there's the very creepy rubber-faced health secretary Wes Streeting, who was pictured kind of grinning on the campaign trail in the 2024 general election in the UK. And so a large number of senior Labour figures are having to do, huge volte-faces and say, oh, well, I damn him, I trusted him and he lied to me. Well, I mean, the average person on the street could have told them that he was up to his neck in Epstein. Some of the photos that have emerged of Mandelson in the files, which are obviously heavily redacted, they show him getting foot massages. They depict him walking around with a shirt on and just underpants, which is extremely creepy. It's certainly not a kind of costume choice that any normal person would go for, let alone allow themselves to be photographed in this manner. So I mean, and there's tons of weirdness in on top of the sexually perverted stuff, where Mandelson clearly has this kind of longing for Epstein's company and was emailing him saying, you don't think about me anymore, I miss you, and blah blah. It's really weird.
Epstein seemed to find him kind of annoying.
Oh yeah, well, not quite as annoying as Elon Musk, who got tried to invite himself to the wildest parties on Epstein's island, and then Epstein had to get Ghilaine Maxwell to get him to go away, to the extent that Maxwell was like, we're thinking of selling the island. But yeah, I mean, I think that Epstein probably didn't have very much patience for people. He was inundated on a daily basis, it seems, by emails from the great and the good, or are they people who are powerful within politics, finance, the military, intelligence. Now, I think that there's
a chance that Elon Musk email was not authentic. So I just want to be very clear here. And the Mandelson emails are pathetic.
I think at one stage Epstein
we're praying for
or something. They're very, very creepy. We are praying for a hung parliament, alternatively a well-hung young man.
What's your take on that one?
Well, I mean, this refers to how this was right when the general election was happening in 2010, and it was widely predicted that Labour was going to lose. So I don't know, maybe it was a bit of gallows humour because Mandelson knew he was on the way out. But I mean, their bond is super creepy. Mandelson comes across as just this sleazy, just oily, sinister presence, kind of hovering around the ghost of the feast. I mean, but there's a wider point to be made here, which is quite serious, which is that there's a kind of through line in all Epstein's released, well, not all, but a lot of Epstein's released emails, is he and his associates seek to profit from misery and destruction overseas. So there's an email from a Rothschild right around in March 2014, right around the time of the Maidan coup, where this Rothschild says, there's a lot of opportunities here. In 2011, just before Gaddafi was sodomized to death on TV by Western-backed rebels, an associate messaged him to say, I'm working with MI6 and Mossad veterans to asset strip Libya.
Here's that email you mentioned. It's from Ariane de Rothschild to Jeffrey Epstein. And Epstein responds, this is after the Maidan coup, Ukraine upheaval should provide many opportunities, many. Well, but the Biden family certainly got the message there. Hunter Biden was like running a parallel kind of Epstein network through Ukraine. Epstein's basically, that's what I think the real value of these emails is it shows you how business gets done. In for example, a mineral rich, gas rich, poor, impoverished country that had just come under de facto NATO and EU control in Ukraine. That's how it gets done, through these power networks.
Yeah, well, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, well, no, I mean, yeah, it's quite clear that was the kind of the core interest of Epstein was, well, what events are occurring across the world? How can I profit from them? How can my friends profit for them? And I might add as well that there are some exchanges with Peter Thiel where Epstein is discussing how chaos is a dedicated strategy of the US, and that creates opportunities for us because if half the world's on fire, one way or another, we can, in the spirit of disaster capitalism, make a mint off it, whether directly or not. But yeah, I mean, Mandelson was clearly, an informant who Epstein passed this information on isn't necessarily clear. That it's been we've reported at the Grayzone that he did have contacts with a number of foreign intelligence services, including Mossad, and he would routinely pass information to them. So I mean this is highly substantive, and I might add that there is now an official investigation into Mandelson's wrongdoing. Initially, Keir Starmer tried to fudge it so the Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee would restrict what documents are released, and that got voted down amidst some controversy. So it looks like there will be a significant disclosure. I mean, it probably won't be in complete, and it's likely that there will be some degree of whitewash. But I mean, it's pretty bad, and no one is coming to the rescue. I think hence his rather pitiful pleading letter saying, "Oh, leave me alone." I mean, he was trying to invoke powers under the press code, which are usually extended to the grieving families of murder victims. Of course, Mandelson is no victim at all. He's a perpetrator, but yeah, I mean, this could result in the end of Keir Starmer. I mean, he's already the least popular prime minister in British history. Starmer gave this very bizarre speech where he looked like he was on the verge of tears, where he claimed, he took the standard line of, "Well, Mandelson lied to me, and it was an error of judgment on my part, and I wish I'd never met him." Blah blah. It's not going to wash. I think, particularly now. I mean, it's interesting
because he knew, I guess, what everyone knew about Trump, which is that, but he knew that Mandelson was deeply involved with Jeffrey Epstein all along, and none of this was surprising. And for all we know, he knew that Epstein Epstein was provided by Mandelson with advance info of the collapse of the Gordon Brown government. I mean, this is, it wouldn't be surprising. Let's watch this exchange in question hour. This is the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, who's taking down Keir Starmer, and he's sort of shaking. He's stammering. He's Keir Starmer.
Knew this. I asked him at that dispatch box. He gave Mandelson his full confidence at that dispatch box, not once, but twice. He only sacked him after pressure from us. I am asking the Prime Minister something very specific, not about the generalities of the full extent. Can the Prime Minister tell us, did the official security vetting he received mention Mandelson's ongoing relationship with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein?
So clear. Prime Minister.
Yes, it did.
Oh.
Result, various questions were put to him. I intend to disclose to this House all of them, the national security, prejudice to international relations on one side. I want to make sure this House sees the full documentation, so it will see for itself the extent to which time and time again Mandelson completely misrepresented the extent of his relationship with Epstein and lied throughout the process, including in response to the due diligence.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is shocking what the Prime Minister has just said. How can he stand up there saying that he knew, but he just asked Peter Mandelson if the security vetting was true or false? This is a man who had been sacked from cabinet twice already for unethical behavior. That is absolutely shocking. And that is why later today, my party will call on the government to release all documents relating to Mandelson's appointment, not just the ones the Prime Minister wants us to see. Because this government is trying to sabotage that release with an amendment to let him choose what we see, the man who appointed Mandelson in the first place. Labour MPs now have to decide if they want to be accessories to his cover-up. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that he won't remove the whip if they refuse to vote for his whitewash amendments?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the first exemption is in relation to anything that could compromise national security. That is not a small matter, and many members on the benches.
So he's citing national security as grounds not to release the full truth about Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. Is that right?
Yeah, and I might add that I think that he expanded on that, where he said that Starmer said that this would, full disclosure, might threaten our relations with our closest ally, which was code for the US, and a third country, which is code for Israel, presumably. I mean, whether this is a psyop, I don't know, but the media is now taking the line that, well, the Trump administration might be offended if there's full disclosure, and that's another reason to not release the files. I mean, it very much seems that the ISC is pushing full steam ahead with this. And I might add as well, the ISC it's meant to vet the work of MI5, MI6, and GCHQ. Its members have an extensive history of complaining that the agencies don't tell them anything and they have no idea what's going on. Last summer, the head of the ISC made a series of extremely angry statements to the effect that their funding has been completely slashed to the point they can't really conduct their work, and there's billions being spent on spying operations at home and abroad that the ISC doesn't know anything about. Starmer had promised to give them a cash injection, but then didn't. So, I mean, I strongly think that they're, out for revenge to an extent, and this could be very, very damning. But like I say, I think this is still to an extent a limited hangout. Although it's somewhat an improvement on a DOJ spokesperson saying that nobody's going to be prosecuted as a result of the files, despite acknowledging that they contain images of death and rape. And they've had this information for God knows how long, and they've not done anything with it, despite the fact that there are many prominent people who are openly named in them. Some of their names are redacted, some of them aren't. I might add that there's a very interesting one of the most interesting emails that I've seen is from Jean-Luc Brunel, who was this French model scout who he died in a French prison in December 2020. He was being held there on charge of rape of children. There's an email that he sent to Epstein following the Maidan coup. I think he talks about how Ukraine's my favorite country now, and it's just like the 1980s in Europe. And what he was referring to is the fact that in the 1980s, several European governments, including the French and the German governments, had formal state-sanctioned paedophilia policies, where they put young at-risk boys primarily. There were some women or young girls who were placed with paedophiles as a matter of policy very deliberately, in the belief that this would somehow improve their life. I mean, it's absolutely horrendous, but what Brunel meant by this was, well, in Ukraine now, I can do whatever I like, and I'm not going to face any repercussions for it.
Right.
His death is likewise extremely suspicious. It was widely suspected that he was going to, flip on Epstein, because they were very close friends for many years, and he died before that could happen. I might add as well, I think that because the material is so explosive, and some of it might be false, that must be noted. What's been rather forgotten is just
here's that email by the way, sorry to interrupt. So you were saying what's been forgotten.
Yeah, no, sorry. What's been kind of forgotten is the fact that the circumstances of Epstein's suicide, or was it, they remain deeply weird, and we've had some revelations that there was someone who was on his floor who wasn't meant to be around the time, but it was
who had strangled other people to death in the past and was a former New York cop. Is that who you're referring
Oh
to?
yeah, that's that was Taglione, I think. I mean, he like strangled people with zip ties and was like a cocaine dealer on the side as well as being a cop, and was this this hulking sumo wrestler type character. I mean, we reported the Grayzone at the start of 2024 on the basis of a vast amount of Bureau of Prison documents. That everything about his alleged suicide is extremely weird. They couldn't find any evidence that he'd actually tried to kill himself the first time, contrary to what they claimed publicly. And Epstein claimed that he didn't remember what had happened and asked to be left alone and didn't want it logged, and was quite aggressive in pushing back against that. There was a kind of a whitewash cover-up report where they concluded that the Bureau of Prisons concluded that Epstein had killed himself, and they spun a comment that he made in the psychological evaluation where he refers to himself as a coward as proof that he committed suicide, when he made that comment in the explicit context of denying he had suicidal intent and saying that, well, I'm a coward, I can't stand pain, so how could I kill myself? And that's been rather forgotten, but I mean, it's just, it was, I remember following this very closely at the time, which is now nearly 6 years ago now, but nearly 7 years ago now. But it was quite extraordinary. I mean, he died. There's no CCTV. The guards weren't where they were meant to be. They got prosecuted. That got dropped almost immediately after Ghilaine Maxwell was prosecuted. A lot of his associates said that he wasn't suicidal and they didn't believe he'd taken his own life. There was an independent autopsy report which concluded that he hadn't hung himself, that he'd been strangled. So I mean, that is a whole can of worms which is not really being looked at. But I think, given how much he knew, and the fact that he'd clearly been exposed, it seems pretty ineluctable that a decision was made by someone somewhere to take him out before he spilled anything, really, really damaging about, the ruling elites of Israel, the US, Britain, and other countries. But yeah, I mean, sorry
to interrupt, because we're going a lot of places here. There's this, and I don't totally know what to make of this, but there's this 4chan post by an officer. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, on the day when he was found, claiming that he'd been killed,
and saying that he was being taken out.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know how far you want to go down the conspiracy rabbit hole, but now his name has been revealed to be Roberto Grijalva.
Yeah, I mean, someone posted on
the poster was anonymous, but this was an officer who was on the scene.
Yeah, claiming that they were an officer on the scene, and they announced it before he was, formally found and declared dead.
Next thing we know, he's put in a single man cell and hangs himself. Here's the thing: the Trip van did not sign in. Blah blah blah. You guys, I'm shaking right now, but I think they switched him out. And then there's FBI files which essentially dox him as Special Officer Grijalva. I don't know if anyone's tried to reach him. Is Jeffrey Epstein in hell or Tel Aviv? Which one is it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's you act as if the two are mutually exclusive. But
Polymarket now has bets on whether you, and we're not sponsored by Polymarket. Polymarket's evil should be destroyed. They should all be prosecuted. But they have now bets on whether Epstein is actually alive. I mean,
oh God! I mean, late stage capitalism can't beat it. But yeah, I mean, the whole thing stinks to high heaven in the fact that, I mean, that he was meant to have a cellmate according to regulations and didn't, and then the individual who was his cellmate, he subsequently testified because he got released due to COVID. He said that he didn't believe that Epstein had killed himself because Epstein's quite tall and the bunk's not massive. So how would you hang yourself from the bunk?
You would have to kind of huddle down. Get down and then sort of get on your hold up your knees if you're Epstein's height in order to hang yourself. So it's difficult to imagine. I mean, the circumstances of someone accused of pedophilia or sexually abusing minors, that there's a high risk of suicide there. But you demonstrated through your analysis of the Bureau of Prisons documents that Epstein was consistently demonstrating that he feared physical harm in prison and that he was averse to suicide, and that his mental state was consistently listed as sort of temperate, like he was just had a stable mental state, according to prison psychiatrists. So there are a lot of questions there. I want to go back to something else you mentioned, referring to Jean-Luc Brunel and the sort of the proffering of women to Epstein's network, because you mentioned the other day that so many of these very young women came from the Balkans.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of reference to the Balkans, and it's clear that he had a preponderant interest in people from Eastern Europe. Now, there's a particularly creepy reference where they're talking about how producing a children's book for Kosovo, which is this kind of statelet that got wrenched out of Serbia following the NATO bombing in 1999. And he talks about how, well, there's 1 million children there, which is like this tremendous resource. Wanted to target them with a children's book, presumably with coded messages of a suggestive nature, which is deeply creepy. But yeah, it fits into this disaster capitalism through line in a lot of his communications. Is Kosovo was shattered by NATO bombing, and then a prostitution industry basically exploded overnight locally. There was a lot. It became a European centre of child and people trafficking, and there's an Amnesty report from the early 2000s which finds that the primary source of clientele for sex workers in Kosovo was NATO and UN troops who were stationed there. And all of these brothels popped up like right next to their bases, kind of makeshift shacks where German and British and French and US soldiers could get their rocks off if they were bored. But I mean, this is, again, exactly the same thing happened in Ukraine post 1991, and it just got worse and worse and worse, to the extent that even I think the Kiev Post, which is very pro-government outlet, admitted in 2009 that Ukraine was this hub for paedophiles and mail order brides and stuff. I mean, this was the plan for Russia after 1991 as well. That didn't quite work out due to the election of the seizure of power by a certain president in 2000. But yeah, I mean, it's quite clear that he viewed. Epstein viewed the former kind of communist sphere in Central and Eastern Europe as this endless reservoir of kind of human wealth that could be sold, traded, loaned out to people. It is, of course, I mean, it seems that Bill Gates got involved in very much with having affairs with women from Eastern Europe that Epstein arranged for him, and then, of course, Bill Gates demanded that allegedly demanded that Epstein get him medicine that he could surreptitiously give to his wife because he gave her an STD he contracted from one of the girls that Epstein hooked him up with, which prompted Epstein to write a note to himself saying that he was disgusted with what Bill Gates was making him do. I mean, but maybe
Bill Gates has denied this just so we don't get sued by his super governmental structure. Bill Gates has denied this, but Epstein wrote a note to himself about Bill Gates getting STDs from, in his words, Russian girls. This was the same year that Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation introduced its $100,000 condom challenge. They're kind of maybe crowdsourcing a solution. And Melinda Gates has denounced Bill Gates for kind of being a depraved individual. This is the real Russia Gates, I guess.
Well, I mean, subsequent Tish, but subsequent to this is when Bill Gates gets really interested in pandemic modeling, and he's talking to Epstein about that. I mean, there's other weirdness where Epstein was pressuring an academic and a biologist to really dig into LGBT research, particularly with a focus on trans and stuff. I mean, Epstein had his fingers in a lot of pies, it seems. I mean, there's another email where a redacted name is asking him and Stephen Sikovsky, who was the president of, I think he was the president of Windows at the time, saying I've got this idea to create a Somaliwood, which would be like Hollywood in Somalia, and we're going to create programming for local children and stuff, which is, I mean, it's just so unbelievably creepy.
Yeah.
And this is a conversation with someone who jokes about what the French plural of paedophiles is. You know, like, and does so quite readily. And you know, and I mean, in his conversations with Mandelson, they were talking about how I think at one point Epstein says you're a naughty boy or something. It's just so sick. And it's a lot to take on. I don't think that. I mean, I'm quite impressed with the fact that people haven't moved on from this, because my assumption was it would blow over quite quickly. I mean, all of my social media feeds, you know, all of my conversations with people are just, you know, pretty much relentless links and like photos from this tranche. There is a lot of very interesting stuff in there. There's probably a lot of rubbish as well. You know, as sickening, as visceral as a mental image as it is. I mean, I don't quite think that, you know, George H.W. Bush raped a young boy who then went on to see people ripping out children's intestines and eating their feces. I mean, that's not just because I don't want that to be true, but
do you believe the references to pizzas are references to children? I mean, it's kind of taken the Pizzagate conspiracy back to you know, I mean, it's at the point where Tucker Carlson is legitimizing the Pizzagate conspiracy with Ian Carroll.
Well, I mean, they're quite clearly salacious references. Like, I think there's one email where someone refers to how, like, he loved the pizza and the cheese is still dripping down his chin. I mean, again, like, it's so horrendous. But I mean, there are a preponderant number of references to pizza, it must be said. I don't necessarily think that validates the entire, you know, Pizzagate theory, but I mean, it's quite clear that they used code words a lot, and there was also some indications that there were certain things that they couldn't discuss, that Epstein wasn't willing to discuss on email. So I mean, you're happy to, you know, boast about being a paedophile in private, but you know, there are certain, you know, off limits areas. I mean, I think in one email, Mandelson chummily asks Epstein how's freedom, and he's like, oh, it's like soft and warm, and you know, it's just quite clearly, you know, very clear sexual overtones to so many things that he said. But yeah, as I say, I think that there is still a lot more to come out here, because people have only, I mean, you know, they've only been out for I think it's a week, and you know, there is an enormous amount of stuff to get through. And yeah, some of it will be rubbish, but you know, other material will be very worthy. I mean, again, on the subject of, you know, creating content for children, there's a whole discussion that Epstein had with a futurist he knew, called his name's Holman, and where Pablos Holman, who's this you know, kind of digital guru, they were discussing creating edutainment for children. And how to educate children using video games. There's a specific Holman specifically says, well, you know, if you invest in a computer game for teaching people, then you get the maximum brains for like the minimum amount of money. I mean, of course, that would be, you know, abused to, again, just presumably abused to disseminate particular messages to younger audiences. I mean, Epstein himself was banned under an agreement Microsoft had with New York authorities to deplatform sexual offenders, but he was still using it for a year before they got rid of him, you know, on the basis of his prosecution a few years prior. But it's, yeah, I mean, it's all just like really, really weird. And I think there's another aspect to this which is quite interesting, which is Epstein's clearly a moron. Like, he wasn't a really smart dude, and like, in advance of. Have
you watched his interview with Steve Bannon, for example?
I was going to say, like, yeah, it's really bad. He does not come across well, and what makes it even worse is that based on his released emails, in advance of this interview, he was buying like Investing for Dummies and other books, like kind of explainer books on finance, in advance of this interview, because he wanted to look smart, and he still comes across as a moron. But I mean, you know, his entire backstory is quite clearly fraudulent, and you know, there's no way that he went from being this kind of lowly maths teacher to being on the board of Rothschild in a year. I think that he was probably chosen as someone who, yes, had a predilection for young girls. You probably had a lot of dirt in himself, and then it was judged that he would be a very useful, you know, kind of intelligence asset who could gather information globally, maybe, you know, secure compromat on people, and probably wouldn't ask too many questions, because A, he wasn't that bright, and B, he himself was compromised.
He can barely form a sentence. I think there's, you know, the email style is actually indicative of a lack of intelligence. And it isn't just something about the way elites do business. Like, he really just couldn't form a sentence. He writes in an idiotic way. He speaks in an idiotic way. He has no gravitas. He has like almost no vibe at all, and seems kind of smarmy. And in the interview with Bannon, he's unable to articulate why he started the Santa Fe Institute. He's like, I did it just to examine why ideas actually happen. And, a computer can tell us that it can train itself even better than a human and do something better than a human can do. But I want to know why. So that's why I started that. And then he gets asked about the Trilateral Commission, how he joined it at age 32, and he's unable to provide any color about what took place inside the Trilateral Commission. So you start to wonder about him. But he was in the middle of a vast and powerful transatlantic network. What C. Wright Mills would have called the power elite. Janine Waddell wrote a book called The Shadow Elite, or another important book, Understanding How Power Actually Operates in the West. And Epstein was in the middle of it. I mean, he should have. I don't think he was on her radar at the time. But that's the value of these emails. I think it's the value of the emails is you see who's actually in the room, who's actually playing the game, and what kind of depraved culture defines them, and how actually intellectually cretinous many of them are. I mean, they're just like
they're like kind of like midwit liberals.
Chopra, like cute girls. Cute girls are real. Like, of course, this is the fraud who we know through Oprah. All the spiritual frauds, like Shmuley Boteach, we know of him through Oprah. Rabbi Shmuley, Dr. Oz, we know of him through Oprah. Dr. Phil, they're all a bunch of weird Zionist frauds. And of course, Deepak Chopra was in Epstein's network, begging Epstein to come to Israel. Can you join us for another segment? But can I also ask you about 2 articles of yours?
Sure.
Because like, if I turn you loose, I can just let you go.
Sure.
You're an institution, but I want to kind of
thanks, Max.
Organize this a little bit. Okay. You just dropped a piece for us about Kincora, which was a boys' home in Belfast, Ireland.
Yeah.
You raised the question of, and this is very topical. Your intro leads with Prince Andrew and his relationship with Epstein, but it goes into this boys' home, which was the site of a massive public scandal. And you raised the question of whether British intelligence was actually using this boys' home as a center for sex abuse in order to establish honey traps to compromise powerful individuals. Tell us, in 5 minutes or less, about the piece you just published with us.
Yeah, sure. So it's in no small part based on a conversation that I had with Chris Moore, who's this veteran BBC journalist who's been researching Kincora since 1980. It's pretty dynamite stuff. There have been suspicions and allegations that Kincora was it was this home for orphans in Belfast, in occupied Ireland, British occupied Ireland, and for many years, speculation has swelled that it was used by the security and intelligence services. And based on Moore's research, I mean, that again, it seems pretty irresistible as a conclusion. There's all sorts of weirdness around it, where it's quite clear that the victims were being raped by quite powerful, prominent figures. Among them, Lord Mountbatten, who was Andrew's great uncle. Andrew took his surname. Interestingly, Mountbatten was a kind of key figure in Andrew's early life. At one stage, Andrew was tapped to potentially marry a young relative of Mountbatten's who was like 16 at the time. The Mountbatten's the original surname of the British royal family, and they changed it because of the war.
Because they were Nazis.
Yeah, because they were Nazis and they were German. They were very German. But anyway, that's by the by. Yeah, so essentially, like, the Kincora basically got busted wide open in 1980. The people running it were sent to trial. One of them was originally going to testify. This is a guy called William McGrath, who boasted to his associates of working for British intelligence and knowing people within MI5 and MI6 who were running this dirty war in occupied Ireland, where they ran paramilitary groups on both sides of the conflict. He boasted about that quite openly. When he was arrested, he said that he was going to expose a lot of inconvenient truths. When the case got to trial, he just actually pleaded guilty, and then he and his two confederates at the home got meager sentences, despite the fact there was this mountain of evidence that they'd systematically sexually abused young boys and pimp them out to big ticket clients like Mountbatten. Since then, there have been multiple official investigations. There have been several police probes that haven't really uncovered much of the truth. Although, I mean, if you read between the lines of the whitewash and the cover-up, sometimes you can find the truth. And it was the historical abuse inquiry, which was convened at the start of the last decade. They uncovered evidence that Maurice Oldfield, who was the head of MI6 and was confirmed to be at least gay, if not have proclivities in the direction of young children, frequented Kincora and knew the people running it very close, had a close relationship with them. The report admits that, but is very quick to dismiss any suggestion that he was engaged in paedophilic abuse, which is quite weird. Again, as I say, if you read between the lines, it's quite clear. This has kind of been a stain on Britain for a very long time. The cover-up continues. In April 2021, the BBC was going to broadcast a documentary called Lost Boys, which documents how numerous children vanished in Belfast during the Troubles. And the documentary concludes that all the cases are linked to abuse at Kincora. That got pulled at the last minute. You can still find its BBC web entry, but it has not and likely will never be broadcast by the British state broadcaster for obvious reasons. And I might add that the Moore told me that there are people involved in the company that made the production company that made the film had break-ins at their homes. So like the cover-up still, obviously continues to this day. Prince Andrew, or the former Prince Andrew, has no such luck because, I mean, he's been stripped of all of his titles. He's been stripped of his royal lodgings, and a Buckingham Palace spokesperson, in response to all of the disclosures about Andrew and Epstein contained in the new releases, said, well, it's up to Andrew and his conscience if he wants to tell the truth about what happened. So, I mean, you're pretty brutally thrown under the bus by the British establishment, because again, a sacrificial lamb, which is not presumably being offered up because they don't want people digging deeper into the bizarre phenomenon of the British royal family having a vast profusion of paedophiles in their gene pool. I mean, that's a very obvious question to ask about why that is. And it's not being asked. But I mean, the media is hammering Andrew pretty intensely. And I think that it's interesting that it's kind of become allowable, because as I reported for the Grayzone a few months back, for many years there was open speculation and indeed kind of muttering in the media that Prince Andrew very much liked the company of young girls, and he just carried on apace without this affecting his position. When his ties with Epstein emerged, an official statement was put out by Buckingham Palace saying, well, they barely knew each other and they met a few times, and they were never friends after Epstein got busted, which is complete and utter rubbish, to say the least. Andrew allegedly wanted to say goodbye to Epstein in person and stayed with him for several days in New York, and there was like a dinner thrown in Prince Andrew's honor, and this was allegedly because he was honorable and wanted to say goodbye in person. I mean, why you would stay at Epstein's mansion when there's like an infinite number of luxury hotels in New York.
I love the excuses. It's like Nellie Bowles, Barry Weiss's wife, is saying she was hanging out with Epstein just because she's a reporter and wants to know what these awful people are actually doing, and Katie Couric didn't know who he was. But Andrew, I mean, they were tight. They were thick as thieves. They went on a walk in Central Park together. Kit, you mentioned earlier a very bizarre email from Windows president Steven Sinofsky. And I don't know if you can turn your notifications off.
Yeah, no, I'm doing it now. Sorry.
I had a fun idea that we'll start a film studio in the breakaway territory of Somaliland, which was just recognized by Israel, is now a real geostrategic target for the Zionist axis, called Somaliwood Studios, with quote unquote the boys in LA. And they wanted to professionalize the African film industry and believed it might also be fun. And they were talking about, a World Economic Forum movement in Nigeria. It's hard for me to extrapolate the real meaning of this other than what they were seeking to do, which is to set up some kind of film studios in Africa to influence young people there. And you have a forthcoming piece for us where you tie this to Sesame Street.
Yeah, sure.
Which you consider to be a CIA mind control program. Can you prove to our whatever normies are watching right now that you're not insane?
Yeah, I did wonder whether you were going to send a van with people in white coats after I submitted that. It is quite wild. But this is all publicly available information, but no one put the jigsaw pieces together. I think that there's with the exception of there's a researcher called Jacob Levitch who did some great work into the origins of Sesame Street. But all of the people who were involved in creating Sesame Street were all people who had worked in psychological warfare and propaganda for the military or intelligence services, and this included there was a psychiatrist called Chester M. Pierce, who is this kind of very prominent African American who founded the Black Psychiatrists of America the same year that Sesame Street was broadcast, and he worked on MK Ultra and conducted very unethical human experiments on unwitting and unwilling human test subjects. There were many MK Ultra experiments which focused on children. The CIA was very interested in creating techniques for interrogation and torture that made people more childlike and therefore more kind of open and susceptible to manipulation and might make disclosures they wouldn't otherwise, because their quote unquote mature defenses crumble. So that's one aspect of it. But more generally, if you look at the publicly available founding documents of Sesame Street, which were written by this woman called Joan Gans Cooney, who was tied to this anti-communist journal called Partisan Review that was funded by the CIA, and then she decided to get involved in children's television, interestingly. And in these documents, she openly talks about how they want to suppress quote unquote aggression in young children, particularly Black Americans. A 1-year review of Sesame Street written in 1970, which appraised its performance to date, specifically noted that Sesame Street managed to effectively infiltrate the homes of a vast proportion of the population of various ghettos in major cities, and children would sit there and watch Sesame Street kind of agog. They were a captive audience and a blank slate combined, and that this was perfect for beaming particular messages to them. And so excuse me, it was a very effective means at a time when there was significant racial tensions in the US, and major riots, and like there were the civil rights movement was really picking up steam. It only became emboldened with the killing of Martin Luther King in 1968. This was a means of effectively creating very passive young children who wouldn't cause problems, wouldn't complain, would just tacitly accept ingrained racism, and wouldn't engage in subversive political action. It was viewed as very effective for reaching these specific audiences. So I mean, it is a matter of public record that the specific purpose of this show was "quote unquote" riot control, from the perspective of the military and intelligence propagandists who created it. And they conducted research which found like music, children were particularly susceptible to music and puppets and colors. And that's why Big Bird exists. And then you fast forward to today, and the US has not only exported Sesame Street to a number of foreign countries, and they very bizarrely they created Sesame Street programming for young people in Uzbekistan to teach them to cope with the "quote unquote" new normal, which is quite sinister. And then I think after the vaccine rollout at Elmo, there was a video of the red puppet getting an injection and encouraging kids to do the same, which is like, I mean, this kind of passed by without anyone really noticing it. It's deeply creepy.
Israel, sorry to interrupt. Israel has a version of Sesame Street which,
of course,
cultivates young people to join the Israeli military and explains to them why they need to participate in the military. It's this with the same style of programming. So.
Yeah, well, it's been repeated over and over again, and it's we were discussing how Jeffrey Epstein had an interest in video games. I mean, that's the way to reach people now. But I mean, for a few years before that, they were specifically talking about setting up a Hollywood redux in Somalia. And I might add that Somaliland, which is this breakaway territory was recognized at the very start of this year by Israel, and has been in the running as a potential dumping ground for refugees from Gaza. It's this very strange kind of barren land that's very heavily penetrated by the British. So the British effectively they run its government, police, courts, military. They even draft legislation which gets adopted. The primary focus is resource extraction. But the Zionist fascination with Somaliland goes a lot deeper. And during World War II, there was a push by major Jewish organizations to create what was known as the Hurrah Council, which was this, they advocated creating a Jewish state on the territory of Somaliland, and justified this on the basis of Jewish scripture. And so I think that there's this kind of very strange religious fascination with Somalia and Somaliland, and it keeps cropping up. And Israel is the very first country to recognize. Excuse me. It was the very first country to recognize Somaliland, which has been gunning for international recognition since 1991. Israel is moving quite quickly to forge economic and military relationships with Somaliland. It's within striking distance of Yemen, which that's quite clearly an interest for Tel Aviv, but also as well, I think that there's a push to get the US government to recognize Somaliland, and when that happens, I'm sure that most a significant proportion of the world, which are the Washington assorted international vassals, will probably follow suit, and that's a absolutely dire outcome for Somalia, about which they're going to be extremely unhappy.
So and I think they're unhappy about having been bombed over 20 times this year under orders from Trump, while the background noise of that bombing reverberates in Minneapolis with 7K cartel influencers descending on Minneapolis to paint Somali Americans as the main architects of fraud in the United States. Now, the Small Business Association, run by Kelly Loeffler, is giving a huge contract to Palantir to investigate that. And, I was wondering, did Peter Thiel pay any of those Nick Shirley influencers to harass kids in daycares and is there some relationship there? And what about Kelly Loeffler, who committed a massive fraud of insider trading on the Senate Intelligence Committee, where she was given a tip that the pandemic was going to be declared, so she sold her stock and made $20 million just like that. Well, she's giving out these contracts, but this is the background noise for war on Somalia. Somaliland is geostrategically located. It is the perfect place from where Israel can attack Yemen and advance the dream of regime change, removing Ansar Allah, which defeated the U.S. in a recent war. It's a major economic choke point. So it's obvious why they're focused on Somaliland. So these emails are fascinating. And then, your point about Sesame Street being designed to program and indoctrinate young people into a particular point of view, to sort of particularly to neutralize the aggression and potential revolutionary tendencies of inner city Black Americans after the riots of the late 60s, the MLK riots. It connects to an email that some internet sleuths just discovered in this massive Epstein tranche, which is so meaningful to me and just so amazing. And it's from Jess Staley, when he was the CEO of Barclays Bank. He's an American banker, or some would say bankster. This is in, just years after Occupy Wall Street and after the financial crash. And he's writing to Jeffrey Epstein, "You want to know why we are not Sao Paulo?" And he's referring to, I think, a kind of color revolution which was going on in Brazil, in which masses of people were in the streets to remove Dilma Rousseff, who was the center-left social democratic president. You know why we're not Sao Paulo? Watch the TV ads on the Super Bowl. It's all about hip Blacks and hip cars with white women. The group that should be in the streets has been bought off by Jay-Z. Now, I don't know if he's literally saying they were bought off by Jay-Z. Jay-Z was really a symbol at that time of neoliberal capitalism. He had made himself sort of a spokesman for the financial establishment, for Wall Street. He actually came into Occupy Wall Street and attempted to subvert it, co-opt it, and essentially undermine it by introducing his own brand, Occupy All Streets. Basically, like, let's keep young Black people away from hating Wall Street after their dream of home ownership was just dashed forever. Jay-Z got some minority ownership stake in the Brooklyn Nets just so he could kind of be a symbol of the Barclays Center, which was named for the bank that Jess Staley owned, but which also kind of doomed that area around Atlantic Yards and to massive gentrification, and pushed what was left of the Black population there further out towards East New York, because this was a massive Frank Gehry designed arena, the Barclays Center. So Jay-Z came in to kind of legitimize that whole thing. So does he mean that they were literally bought off by Jay-Z? Jay-Z was at that time starting to pump money into Ferguson, into BLM. Was that like a plot to subvert Occupy Wall Street by focusing everyone in on identity politics and race in place of class? Look at where BLM wound up years later, in nihilism, liberalism, just a tool for the Democratic Party against Trump. And you start to ask all these questions, and it makes you a little bit conspiratorial. I don't know what your reaction is, but this one hit really hard for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is obviously like pictures of Puffy and Jay-Z, snapping photos with the Clintons and Bill Gates and Epstein. So, I mean, you never know. I mean, this is where this stuff takes you. Like, if you just do the slightest bit of digging. I mean, just really quickly on the Palantir point as well.
Yeah.
Like, the ubiquity of that company is absolutely insane. Like they've been given British government contracts, worth hundreds of millions of pounds, including like you're handing over sensitive NHS data to them. I mean, this is Peter Thiel's Batman influence, surveillance and spying tool that creates all of these very detailed databases on people, and is used by a worrying amount of intelligence services in the military, and is increasingly being rolled out to domestic public-facing stuff. And Mandelson was involved in arranging a visit by Keir Starmer to Palantir HQ, and then subsequent to this, the Ministry of Defence gives Palantir a 240 million contract. But it's denied that there's any causal link there whatsoever. But I mean, they are cropping up all over the place. It's not being talked about at all, particularly in mainstream politicians. But I mean, the British media is increasingly getting concerned about this, which is quite interesting. I mean, it's quite wild how this stuff works. And I think that if nothing else, the Epstein files do kind of lift the lid on how unsophisticated this stuff is. It's literally like one rich, powerful, awful person speaking to another powerful, awful person and setting up a meeting with someone, and then the deal comes out of it.
It's pandemic preparedness.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, Palantir and Oracle as well, which is, another deeply shady firm, which is the Trump administration is
Larry Ellison's firm.
Yeah, it was like Palantir and Oracle that got the COVID contracts in the US, wasn't it? It's deeply creepy, and this stuff is ratcheting all the time, without much in the way of public knowledge, let alone concern. Although I do think that the trying to get involved in sensitive private health data is probably a bridge too far, because the British still revere the NHS, even though it's been kind of driven into the ground in the past 30 years, if not longer. But I mean, it is quite extraordinary that this stuff just happens without anyone really knowing about it. As I say, it's not sophisticated. It's not it's not like some high level, extremely slick PR and lobbying campaign. It's literally just messaging Jeffrey Epstein, who puts you in touch with someone else in his pedo Rolodex. Whether anyone named is going to face criminal charges is another question. Perhaps the laws don't exist to actually prohibit this stuff, aside from leaking information like a sieve directly to Epstein. That is illegal, and he could be got on that. A statement demanding that people leave him alone notwithstanding.
Yeah, so there's so much there. I'm almost like getting lost, because there's so many areas where we could take this. But can you stay for one more segment on Jeffrey Epstein's Jeffrey Epstein actually being a Russian spy? And that's really what this is about, is Russia. This is sort of the cover-up that we're witnessing in real time being played out through mainstream media. The Telegraph dropped this story. It started in British media, MI6 adjacent media. Poland to examine increasingly likely possibility that pedophilia scandal was co-organized by intelligence services in Moscow. Oh, really? Well, yeah, it seems increasingly clear to everyone who wants to deny what this is, who Jeffrey Epstein's real associates were. That would be CBS News. You mentioned Oracle, Larry Ellison, his son, David Ellison at Paramount, buying CBS for Barry Weiss, whose Free Press he purchased. Barry Weiss, the self-described Zionist fanatic whose life is dedicated to promoting Israel, who's basically also owned by the Palantir and PayPal mafia. I mean, Joe Lonsdale basically helps run her fake university in Austin. She's Mark Andreessen's PR agent. She's hosting all of these close Epstein associates on her new network. She tried to get Alan Dershowitz in a debate on gun violence with Dana Loesch. I mean, who the hell wants to hear that? And now CBS is introducing to the American public that it's actually Russia that's behind Jeffrey Epstein.
Poland says it's looking into possible connections between sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and Russian intelligence services. The announcement came after the U.S. Justice Department last week released millions more files related to the federal investigation into Epstein.
Okay, well, I just realized we always get demonetized if we show anything from CBS because they actually don't want people to see what they broadcast because the only reason it's going to show up on the internet is to be mocked. But it's clear what they're doing there. Oh, the Washington Post. What do we got? Yeah, this is on the day that Netanyahu is denying that Israel had anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein built ties to Russians and sought to meet Putin, files show. This is from, you know, they laid off like 1/3 of their staff and the rest of the staff is just there to pump out like MI6 CIA propaganda. I guess that's why they didn't fire their, their digital disinformation editor, Joseph Menn.
Jesus Christ, we're in the wrong game, aren't we, Max? But I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, I think that it's interesting. This did start in Britain, and a number of British.
Yeah, the Daily Mail also.
Yeah, a number of British newspapers, which are among the worst newspapers in the entire world, which is saying something. They really ran with this. No, it was quite interesting to see the mainstream media jump onto it, and then you have like the leader of this opposition party, the Liberal Democrats, like openly saying that in Parliament, Epstein was clearly linked to Russia, so that creates like a massive national security risk. With Mandelson being so close to him, I mean, maybe he was compromised by the Russians. I mean, it's complete and utter rubbish. And I might add that, like, Mandelson also at one stage was like offering to help Epstein get a Russian visa. I mean, it's quite a strange spy that can't get a visa to Russia. And there's another point you made here as well, which is that
they couldn't get the visa, and he was coaching him on how to approach Putin, and Putin didn't want to talk to him.
Yeah, well, I mean, he kept on trying to meet with Putin, and that's one of the reasons why he appears in the document so often. But also, as well, I mean, it's quite clear that Epstein was interested in trying to groom. Poor choice of words. He was trying to groom opposition politicians in Russia because he was angry that Putin was a stop to Epstein making an enormous amount of money via potentially illicit means in the country. So I mean, yeah, it's complete and utterly farcical. But what's interesting is like how people see through this. Like I looked at the Daily Mail's report on this, if you can even call it that, and the comment section was full of like people saying this is absolute bullshit. Why are you trying? Why are you breathing life into this Russiagate corpse? And I mean, in some cases, it has been quite prominent. Russiagate is like the complete lunatic Peter Jukes, who runs this very spooky publication called Byline Times, who says that Putin's all over the emails. He was like this key Epstein contact. It's not true. And Epstein himself, as I mentioned, he was in touch with people tied to MI6. He was in touch with people tied to Mossad. He was, of course, in close quarters with Ehud Barak, who I might add as well. Barak has launched this kind of flew under the radar. He launched this firm that sells facial recognition technology, but also they've created this technology that can hack into CCTV cameras in real time and replace the footage. So, I mean, one might wonder why Barak would be so interested in such a resource. And, in other emails, Epstein openly states, I work for the Rothschilds. So, I mean, I'm really not seeing how in any universe you could plausibly claim that he was tied to Russia. He quite clearly had an in with Zelensky as well. Interestingly, Putin allegedly told Epstein or people within his milieu that he thought that Zelensky was controlled by Israel, and of course, Zelensky has tried to market future Ukraine as as another Israel, like this heavily weaponized society that's going to run around the world causing chaos, carrying out assassinations at the US behest. And I might add that there are emails with this UAE figure. What's his name? The senior Emirati.
Oh, Suleiman bin. His name. I'm forgetting his name. I'll pull it up shortly.
Yeah, but there's, I mean, this Suleiman, he messaged Epstein in the wake of the Mossad's assassination of Mahmoud Mabou in Dubai in January 2010, and he was very angry. He seemed quite angry with Epstein and was saying this doesn't help anyone.
It's Sultan bin Suleiman, and he's off to sample a fresh 100% female Russian on his yacht, he declares in an email to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, well, it's like, yeah, Suleiman says that this killing, this assassination, and this kind of daring assassination in Dubai, where like all of these Mossad agents like stole the identities of like British and Australian and Irish citizens, and like pretended to be them.
Mabou, they assassinated a Hamas operative whose name was Mabou. They dressed as tourists and followed him into his hotel room dressed as tennis, like they were holding tennis rackets, the Mossad assassination team, and then they failed to be able to kill him. They tried to drown him in his bathtub, then they tried to electrocute him, and they failed, and it took hours for them to be able to finally strangle him. They stole Canadian passports, of real Canadians, which made Canada's government, even under Stephen Harper, the most Zionist prime minister ever at that time, very mad. And I missed this one. So what did he reveal?
Well, no, I mean, in the email that Suleiman sends this message to Epstein in the wake of this killing, saying that he had a bone to pick with Epstein over it, and said that this doesn't help anyone. Why did Mossad do this? So he's clearly seen as a cutout between Mossad and the UAE. I mean, Israel and the UAE have very close relations. So I mean, this was like a spectacularly brazen thing to do, and massively pissed off the governments of the assorted European countries where and Australia, where they stole people's identities and claimed to be and produced fake passports under those identities. And so, I mean, yeah, Epstein's relationship with Mossad is like pretty clear from the emails. There's all sorts of there are. I mean, on the subject of Epstein, not being particularly intelligent. I mean, there are some emails where he discusses his contempt for the goyim, and there's another. There's another email where he says that he was sat down with some far right figures who claim that Jews run the world. And Epstein said, name one, and they said, you've just had like princes and presidents and like heads of government passing through your apartment in a matter of days.
Yeah,
and he was like, oh, I guess I do run the world. I mean, bizarre.
Here's an exchange between Epstein and Steve Bannon in 2018. Bannon says, all roads lead to Beijing, and Jeffrey Epstein counters, or Tel Aviv, which inspired the title of this live stream. Jeffrey Epstein's foundation donated not enormous, but substantial amounts to pro-Israel and Israeli institutions, including Friends of the IDF, which provides equipment to the Israeli apartheid forces, the Jewish National Fund, which steals land from Palestinians, Hillel Foundation. It's clear. I mean, it's clear that Russia was directing him to do this, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
I love this one from Sky News. This is like the ultimate, like, who are you going to believe, me or your two lion eyes? Newly released voice recording appears to show Jeffrey Epstein advising an unknown person on how to approach Russian President Vladimir Putin. Any appearance in the Epstein files does not imply any wrongdoing. I got it wrong, by the way, about Mandelson being advised. So who's the unknown person? They don't show any photo of that unknown person.
Well,
the former Israeli prime minister and defense minister and head of military intelligence and most decorated soldier in Israeli history, Mr. Israel Ehud Barak. Yeah, why don't you tell us that?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, that's an interesting feature as well. Is that like the media is as much? I mean, as far as I can see, the British media is absolutely as much as it's going for Andrew and Mandelson. It's not saying anything about his connections to Israel. and that's just kind of like unsayable in the media entirely. I mean, whether there's something more sinister behind the blaming Russia, or it's just a kind of go-to bad guy, which gets the media off the hook for not talking about his connections to Israel. I don't know. I mean, it's laughable stuff, though.
It's clear if it's Donald Tusk pushing it that there's an interest in trying to implicate Russia and trying to turn the public's attention back to hating Russia. It's clear that that's first and like one of the primary objectives here, but there's also a clear objective to deflect from the obvious, which is that he's surrounded himself with pro-Israel figures and Israeli figures. He hosted the current president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, on Epstein Island in 2014. Ehud Barak was one of his closest Confederates, as you said, Kit. They were working on setting up Palantir-like surveillance firms together. Here's an email of a list of people for Steve Bannon. You can see who's on it. I mean, you can just go to Gmail and just search any name and you'll find just endless pro-Israel figures in his stead. Thiel, Hoffman, Sulzberger, the head of the publisher of the New York Times, Mandelson, Barak.
Yeah, I might add as well. I discussed how Barak runs this firm called Tocker, which creates, can edit CCTV. This is actually like a burgeoning kind of cottage industry in Israel at the moment. There's like a lot of focus on AI-powered video creation and editing technology, and usually these firms are run by people who are like alumni of Unit 82000 or the occupation force, cyber unit, and you've got to ask yourself, well, why are they so interested in editing real-time footage? Is the question, is the answer because relying on AI removes the kind of troublesome human element inherent in old-fashioned intelligence agency honey traps, whether this solves the problem of needing a real-life individual to oversee this kind of operation and targets to take the bait, so you can just create fake blackmail material. I mean, the CIA has a history of making fake sex tapes of foreign leaders they don't like. It's not that much of a stretch.
Yeah. I mean,
we're already through the looking glass with Sesame Street and everything. So I suppose all is permissible.
This was definitely a deep dive. Just one of the key takeaways is the Israel connection, the pro-Israel connection that can't be emphasized enough. It looks like Epstein helped coordinate Robert Kraft's legal defense. That's the owner of the New England Patriots, who has a program to take his players to Israel. Kraft is an arch-Zionist mega donor. He was arrested for soliciting prostitution at a jerk shack or tug and rub joint in Florida, I believe in 2019. And Epstein emailed both Bannon and Ehud Barak about it. Mitch Weber, who's on the board of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, where war criminal Elliot Abrams is also served, was giving it. I don't know the context of this email, but on the surface of it, it looks like he was giving Epstein advice on exploiting jurisdictional differences in age of consent laws to have sex with minors. Again, I would like to see the full context of that email thread. You have Alan Dershowitz, who is Epstein's lawyer and friend, who maintains that he kept his underwear on during massages on Epstein's island, who was nominated, actually, a lot of people missed this, by Netanyahu for the position of Israel's UN ambassador, but didn't take it because he didn't want to give up his US citizenship and likes being in Martha's Vineyard more than he does being in Israel, even though he can't buy pierogies there anymore. A confidential human source told the FBI that Dershowitz was on the phone constantly with Mossad and he was debriefing Mossad. There's a separate CHS document on how Trump has been co-opted by Israel that I'll go over a little bit later. I actually think I have an idea of who that confidential human source is. It's someone who's been in the room with a lot of these figures who've been named here and who has definitely some credibility issues, some serious legal issues. And I reached out to them to ask if they were this confidential human source and didn't hear back, probably because of legal issues. But this is someone who I think knows what they're talking about. The Ghilaine Maxwell connection is just so obvious. Who was her father, Robert Maxwell, who was known to be a Mossad asset, had a de facto state funeral in Israel. And there's a bizarre poem that Ghislaine Maxwell authored after 9/11 that comes out in these files, where she says, it is poetic in a way. It's G-Max. She's G-Max.
Yeah.
It's the year 2032, and a father and his son walk the streets of Lower Manhattan, approaching the site where the World Trade Center used to be on the end of the 20th century. In the end of the 20th century, the father sighs and comments, "To think that right here used to be the Twin Towers." The son, not understanding, asks his father, "What are the Twin Towers?" The father smiles and looks at the son and explains, "The Twin Towers were two huge buildings that used to be here until 2001 when the Arabs destroyed them." The son looks up to his father and asks, "And what are the Arabs?" I don't know if this was like some chain email going around, like spread by like Zionist boomer uncles and aunts, but and what are the Arabs? Basically, that the Arabs have been totally exterminated is the takeaway from this by 2032. Well, I guess they started with Gaza, but interestingly, when I've been in Gaza during bombings, what people say is, "Where are the Arabs?" Because they feel totally sold out by the main Arab states, whether it's, the Emiratis and the Saudis or the Egyptians. They feel totally sold out by everyone except for those pesky Shia Arabs in Lebanon and the Yemeni Houthi. But I think she's saying the Arabs are gone, and this really speaks to a certain genocidal mentality. I mean, it's just too obvious that he was in it, deeply immersed in a very Zionist culture, and we need to have a conversation about that, and that these emails they're bad for the Jews. Chomsky too. I mean, we should quickly cover Chomsky, and then I'll let you go because I know it's late where you are, and I want to cover two other topics before I go. But Noam Chomsky. He helped me in some ways deprogram myself from conventional liberalism when I was much, much younger. Even though I look just like a model of youth right now, I was once much younger and more naive. And Chomsky's work is very accessible. It's kind of like the radical author that you're presented with when you demonstrate an interest in ideas outside the mainstream to the left. I was in Los Angeles. His lectures were constantly on the local Pacifica network, KPFK. I wasn't, I kind of knew about Michael Parenti. His work was floating around, but it wasn't quite as heavily promoted as Chomsky. And Chomsky did published some seminal works. He did a great book on military humanism in the 90s when very few others were questioning it, Michael Parenti being one, the destruction of Yugoslavia. But Chomsky also celebrated in his own kind of subdued way the fall of the socialist bloc. He had some great lectures for Haymarket on U.S. imperialism in Latin America. But then, later in life, after he met his new wife, Valeria, he started to kind of sell a lot of those views out. He actually effectively called for regime change in Nicaragua after 2018. He was presenting a very Puebla group, center-left analysis of Latin America late in his life. I think he signed some letter on Syria advancing regime change there. He might have withdrawn his name. Can't quite remember that one. He was writing articles in The Nation undermining the BDS movement. And all along, he was having these meetings with Ehud Barak, which were brokered by Jeffrey Epstein. And now we learn in this latest tranche of emails that he was giving Epstein advice on kind of how to beat the PR attacks on him for his sexual abuse charges and the overall reputation he'd earned. And Chomsky is just dismissing it all as some kind of fiction, which is really disturbing. I believe his wife Valeria referred to Epstein as a hero in another email.
I mean, both Chomsky and his wife are really excited about going to it. They were like really excited about going to Epstein's properties. I think at one stage Chomsky described himself as how he was thinking hard about visiting one day.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts on what happened? I think we can't overlook the fact that Chomsky, while he was a harsh critic of Israel's government and also came in at a time when there were very few Jewish critics of Israel's government, still had some kind of latent sympathy for Zionism, which enabled him to form this friendship with Ehud Barak, where they were traveling together, and friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And there was a certain kinship there. Also, Jeffrey Epstein was helping handle his finances when he was very old. And I believe, based on what I've seen, I don't have any inside knowledge, that his wife was a factor and played a kind of malign role here. But I mean, what are your thoughts on Chomsky and how this impacts his legacy?
Well, I mean, there's part of me that's kind of glad that it came out while he's still alive. Although, I mean, he's obviously, desperately ill. I do think that like some of his communications with Epstein are like pretty bad. Like, I mean, that's not necessarily to diminish his past oeuvre, but I mean, when he discusses media strategy with Epstein about how to respond to the very real allegations that he was this sexual predator. And I might add, this is another interesting angle that we didn't get into, and I won't spend too much time on it. But I mean, there are some emails where it's clear that Epstein was like paying people to completely game Google searches, so like references to his arrest and jail imprisonment didn't come up. And that his Wikipedia was completely cleansed of any references to it as well. And this was ongoing, and he spent a significant portion of money on this. But the point is he seems to have consulted Noam in the kind of, this is the last months of his life, interestingly. So he was quite clearly obsessed with trying to redeem himself and clear his name, even though he was guilty of sin. And then Chomsky says, well, there's a hysteria that has developed about abuse of women. Which has reached the point that even questioning a charge is a crime worse than murder, which is just like some reactionary bullshit that kind of comes from Bill O'Reilly or some like kind of like far right figure. But it's like it strikes me that Chomsky's someone who does really enjoy like kind of speaking to as broad array of people as possible. Epstein did assist him with, it seems that there was a family member who was ripping off Noam Chomsky and not giving him his money out of his pension, and Epstein investigated this for him. And Chomsky's always keen on meeting people if he disagrees with them, so he can talk. I mean, he was very controversially, although I respect the fact that he did this. He did actually spoke up for Robert Forreston on who was this kind of vile French Holocaust denier. But Chomsky made the point that, well, he has a right of freedom of speech, and he has the right to use that freedom of speech to make himself look stupid and destroy his own credibility, which I think is a fair principle. I might add that across Europe, like it's illegal to do that, and he caught a lot of flack for that, but it was brave. It was in defense of free speech, and so I can imagine how he probably got some kick out of meeting with Steve Bannon. That doesn't mean that he's necessarily working with Steve Bannon or for him. He probably just saw it as an opportunity to meet someone interesting and famous, whose views he didn't agree with. And it's quite clear from some of the other communications as well that, he was challenging some of the stuff that Epstein said about, the economy, finance, politics, etc. So, he wasn't this completely what's the word? He wasn't like submissive to Epstein at all. Although, the fact that the allegations against him, or the charges against him even, were like, well known, and a matter of, I mean, this is art. I think this may well be as a result of Julie K. Brown's reporting for the Miami Herald, which apparently led the DOJ to like reopen their case against him, and that led to his arrest and then imprisonment and death. But it is still quite bad. And you would hope that he has some statement forthcoming on this, because it is quite strange. I also think as well that in one of his emails with Epstein, he mentions he might mention having investments in Israel, like when they're talking about his like kind of monthly outgoing.
Really?
Maybe it's like some donation or something. But I remember seeing a reference to Israel when he's discussing his finances. So that might be another rabbit hole to collapse down another point, Max. But I think in sum, like, this is still a developing, emerging story, and it's been quite wild watching this unfold in real time. I don't think it's actually, contrary to my belief that this would blow over, I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think there's a kind of before and after with the Epstein releases, because we've been confronted with the reality of who Western elites are, and it's worse than Alex Jones ever told us. They literally are a bunch of satanic paedophiles who have all sorts of cult-like obsessions with young children, not just for sex, but that's a big part of it.
Well, I think Valeria Chomsky has some splaining to do, and she can speak. Noam Chomsky is clinically unable to speak or write. He was taken out of hospice a few months ago and is still alive, but she's able to speak and isn't really saying anything. But this is something that's more interesting to people who've been in the left and been around the world of radical and dissident politics, is the fall from grace of Noam Chomsky is much harder. It's much more unpalatable than emails from figures who we knew to be morally depraved or to be political slime bags or ardent defenders of the establishment or icons of the financial elite. Noam Chomsky is someone who attacked these elements throughout his career in a very articulate and methodical way. And also, as you mentioned, Kit, during the Froissart affair, put himself forward as an anarcho-syndicalist, free speech absolutist who really upset me when, in his late 80s, I guess, during the pandemic COVID event, he called for the unvaccinated to be put in concentration camps. I guess, I joked in one of my stand-up bits that, I guess he's so old that he actually saw the Fiddler on the Roof play live on the roof. So it's kind of understandable. And I made the obvious manufacturing of consent joke there. I was first to that. Go back and check.
I think you should start suing the people who are copying you, Max. I mean, I've seen that meme a lot, manufacturing the age of consent. But
But I mean, it was such a betrayal of his reputation as a real defender of human freedom. He wrote a book on anarcho-syndicalism as the ultimate means to the fulfillment of human freedom and rights. And then, by the end, he was a branch Covidian fascist, medical fascist. And, so was much of the institutional left. I mean, they were celebrating the fulfillment of the pandemic plans that were put forward by Bill Gates and Epstein and the World Economic Forum years before. And I wonder if the left today, after all of this, viewing all these files, and I think they might actually understand differently the lockdowns and the acceleration of the Great Reset, and wouldn't be so dismissive of criticism of it after this whole saga of just wall-to-wall Epstein files, which is all anyone's talking about until Trump bombs Iran on behalf of Israel, which might be coming soon, and which is what I'll discuss next. Kit, if there's anything you want to...
Not particularly.
Uzo.
I was just gonna say on that last point that, like, I mean, I think that was like, I mean, I started, my spidey sense about Chomsky started tingling a bit when he like openly came out in favor of like the Arab Spring and saying it was like this wonderful like upsurge of people power, when in reality it was like, you know, a series of like, you know, big tech orchestrated coups that like, you know, brought brutal governments to power, as we've written about in
and
Egypt.
like a giant Qatari info op.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's, I mean, I think that when that was really, I thought either he's lost his marbles, or, you know, so there's something deeper afoot here when he made his COVID statements. Because on top of the fact it's just like a horrendous thing to say, this was at a time when there were doctors tied to the CIA who were openly talking about how hospitals should bounce people who haven't gotten vaccinated to the end of the queue for, or the end of the line for US viewers, for like operations and healthcare and stuff, which was like effectively, you know, endorsing people dying, you know, from preventable diseases because they had the temerity to not get vaccinated. I mean, that was, you know, that was like pretty bad. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's, you know, on payroll. It just means that he's, you know, maybe a bit over the hill. But on that bombshell, thanks so much for having me on, Max. It's been real. I think that was pretty decent as far as impromptu discussions go.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kit. That was another tour de force from Kit Klarenberg. Some are asking how they can support you. Support Kit through his Substack. Just look on Substack for Kit Klarenberg.
Yeah, you can't find it using Google these days if you search my name. So yeah, like track me down on Twitter. You could always you could you know, donate to the Grayzone. You know, I do have to eat on occasion when I'm not working. But no, again, thank you so much, guys. Thanks for joining us, and yeah, thanks for your kind comments and feedback, everyone watching. God bless you. Take care.
Thank you, Kit. All right. Yeah. Someone's calling me crazy. The vaccine was intended to save millions. Well, it didn't do it, did it? It wasn't even a vaccine. A vaccine actually prevents infection and transmission. And I'm not allowed to say on YouTube that didn't. Because also what was brought with the mandates and the lockdowns was massive online censorship like we've never seen before. An entire industry of censorship. I mean, come on. How can anyone believe that anymore? Or Operation Warp Speed. That wasn't just a way of stripping the public of more of our wages paid into taxes to just pay into big tech and big pharma to create something that ultimately didn't work, depriving thousands and thousands of people of jobs for not complying with something that wasn't working. And now it's pretty clear that this was not just planned at Johns Hopkins University in a pandemic tabletop exercise in September 2019, but that Bill Gates was putting it forward years before in his discussions with the Epstein class. And Bill Gates and other tech-focused AI warlords made billions because the economy was fully reoriented through this great reset plan to benefit them. Their wealth surged during the pandemic, during the COVID event. So if you're not questioning that at this point, you're not looking back with a critical eye, you're pretty much doomed for the future. And, you know, I have just a thought that I've been having, viewing this whole discussion about the Epstein files that's raging on every social media site, but especially on Twitter X, where it's like it's my entire timeline, is that people are ascribing the worst characteristics to the financial and political elite that rule us, that have unprecedented power and wealth as they consolidate a system of oligarchy, including that they are pedophiles. Like, it's become more mainstream. It's not just QAnon. It's become more mainstream to refer to them as a pedophile elite, but no one's doing anything. Like, nothing's happening in the real world. I'm not saying no one's doing anything, But I mean, what's going to happen? What will the consequence be for them? How will they be held accountable? Or did everyone just get bought off by Jay-Z, as Jess Staley, former CEO of Barclays, quipped in an email to Jeffrey Epstein? That's a question I'll leave that that's the question with which I'll leave everyone. As we move on to Iran, very quickly, I'm kind of going over time here, but Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, who hold no formal position in the Trump administration, are negotiating through Oman's foreign ministry in Oman with Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, down the hallway. I think Kushner shook hands with Araghchi in a sort of breach of protocol, but they are exchanging notes through the Omani foreign ministry as they negotiate over Iran's nuclear file, apparently over Iran's ballistic missiles. Here's some photos of Kushner and Steve Witkoff with the Omani foreign minister, raising a lot of questions. And the whole reason this is happening is because Donald Trump has decided to threaten Iran with war because he's being nudged by Israel, by Netanyahu, and by his largest donors, Miriam Adelson, Ron Lauder, a figure who's named constantly in the Epstein files as an associate of Epstein, who was part of Netanyahu's mega group of millionaires and billionaires that would support his political fortunes from within the US while pushing pro-Israel institutional activism across the West. This is only happening because Israel is demanding that the US attack Iran, which poses no threat to US national security. This is only happening because the US instrumentalized protests to foment riots alongside Israeli intelligence and I would assume British intelligence, which left thousands dead. 2 days of rioting from January 8th to January 9th. And as Wyatt Reed and I detailed in an article at the Grayzone, the death toll has been fabricated and concocted by sources close to the Clown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who incited those riots, calling for Iranians to kill government workers and kill government media workers and take over institutions. Trump called for Iranians to take over institutions. Monarchist sources are pushing this phony death toll of 30,000. US media started reporting it in Time magazine. Then The Guardian began reporting it to sort of legitimize it through the voice of the left liberal London intelligentsia. And then EU ministers followed by designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization to give a European green light to a US attack on Iran on behalf of Israel. And it's being stalled through negotiations in Oman. The idea that Iran would give up its ballistic missiles. Wait a minute, actually, let me make one quick point about those protests. Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, for the second time, after saying something similar in Davos, has taken credit for the protests, which mutated into very violent, deadly riots in Iran through the instrumentalization of sanctions or financial terrorism against the Iranian economy. And this is his most blatant confession yet.
Treasury, and what we have done is created a dollar shortage in the country. At a speech at the Economic Club of New York in March, I outlined the strategy. It came to a swift and I would say grand culmination in December when one of the largest banks in Iran went under. There was a run on the bank. The central bank had to print money. The Iranian currency went into free fall. Inflation exploded. And
watch the woman nodding behind him over here.
Currency went into free fall. Inflation exploded. And hence we have seen the Iranian people out on the street. We will continue monitoring all the partners, all the Iranian partners, The good news, Senator, is that we have seen, and we can see it with our fencing, the Treasury.
So, I mean, he admits it again, that sanctions were designed to destabilize Iran and drive riots, and he's taking credit for the riots. These were not peaceful protests. This was a bridge between the 12-day war and the coming assault on Iran. And in many ways, the riots themselves were a more devastating act of war on Iran than an Israeli assault last June 2025, because it pits Iranians against one another. It pits neighbor against neighbor through economic warfare, through desperation. And that's what many Iranians are telling me, is that this was much more psychologically damaging because it's coming from within their own society. Reminds me a lot of what took place in Nicaragua in 2018, which the Nicaraguan government defeated. But these negotiations are ongoing. Steve Witkoff, whose family is very close to the Zionist movement, Steve Witkoff, who praised the former director of the Mossad at a fundraiser for United Hatzalah, the Israeli pseudo-rescue group, which hyped up a lot of the October 7th hoaxes, is there with Jared Kushner, the presidential son-in-law, who's overseeing the Board of Peace to transform Gaza into a series of high-tech, biometrically enforced concentration camps and data centers. Jared Kushner literally was in bed with Netanyahu, or almost, when he was a boy. His father, Charles Kushner, fraudster who was pardoned by Trump, is now the ambassador to France. His father used to host Netanyahu when Netanyahu was in town in New York and he was the opposition leader. And Jared would be asked to give up his bed so Netanyahu could stay over in his bedroom. And I guess Jared would like sleep on the couch or somewhere else. So that's how close Jared Kushner is to Israel. And these are the two figures negotiating on behalf of the US with Iran. What is Iran being asked to do? They were being asked to give up some of their ballistic missiles, especially their long-range ballistic missiles, at a time when they're introducing a new hypersonic missile, which can reach targets in Israel in less than 5 seconds. They're being asked to give up their deterrence, just as Gaddafi gave up his deterrence and was met with bayonets in his backside by NATO-backed death squads, literally backed by NATO. The Libyan Islamic Fighting Group was under NATO air cover when they beheaded Gaddafi's guards and sodomized him with a bayonet. That was the price he paid for normalizing and giving up his deterrence. The Syrian government struck a deal to give up its chemical weapons. Well, there's almost no longer a Syria, and they've been replaced with a rebranded Al-Qaeda government. What reward will Iran get if it gives up its ballistic missiles, or it stops enriching uranium and gives up on potentially becoming a breakout nuclear power? It's pretty clear Iran will be destroyed as a country and balkanized, and they can't do that. They're not going to do it. So I expect these negotiations to fail, given how compromised the U.S. negotiators are, the real forces that they represent, the demands the U.S. is making, and the position that Iran has been placed in. Where, after seeing what took place in Venezuela, I think it's pretty clear that the only language that the U.S. and Israel understand is force. If you do not use force, they will come in and kidnap your head of state or kill them and then take over your country. And if Trump's operation in Venezuela had gone wrong and there was a Black Hawk Down incident, I don't think Donald Trump would even be attempting this in Iran. But he was on some kind of psychological high after an operation in which special forces literally marched into Caracas and picked up the head of state and his wife as though they were catching an Uber. So Iran has to demonstrate strength here and deploy real force. And the message they are sending is that if the US attempts to assassinate its leader, there will be a regional war, and all of Iran's regional cards, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, Yemeni Ansar Allah, they will be put on the table. And Iran has been conducting naval exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, major economic choke point. The global economy will suffer massively, and will all be because Israel decided to activate Trump to carry out this war. Donald Trump, who is referred to in one of the most interesting recent Epstein files as having been co-opted by Israel, according to FBI file 1023 and a confidential human source. And again, I think I know who that source is, but I can't confirm it because they won't respond to me. That Trump has been co-opted by Israeli influence networks, with Jared Kushner functioning as the central power broker during Trump's first term. The CHS report comes from an FBI-validated informant, giving it a higher credibility threshold. Here it says, Kushner is the real brains behind his organization and his presidency. There's also an interesting section here. Chabad is doing everything they can to co-opt the Trump presidency. Chabad is basically state-sanctioned Judaism. On the day Trump was elected president, Ivanka Trump and Jared were at the gravesite of Rabbi Schneerson, who is the most powerful rabbi in the Chabad network. Jared didn't disclose his stake in cadre because of its ties to the Russian state. CHS believed this is the real Russian collusion story. Kushner, it goes on. But yes, Jared Kushner is heavily involved with Chabad. I think Chabad helped convert Ivanka to Orthodox Judaism. Chabad is a fascistic, settler-oriented religious nationalist cult that believes that the late Rabbi Menachem Schneerson may be the Messiah. And many Trump-affiliated figures and Trump administration cabinet-level secretaries are Chabadniks. One of them, besides Jared and Ivanka, you have Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary. Here they are. They're paying tribute to Menachem Schneerson at his grave. Lutnick brought Trump to the grave. By the way, who was Lutnick's neighbor in New York? It was Jeffrey Epstein. And Jeffrey Epstein and his buddy Les Wexner from the Mega Group helped Howard Lutnick buy that townhouse. And Lutnick's sons are involved in all kinds of shady business deals through Trump Incorporated. This is such a bizarre scene. So that confidential human source, I think, was really onto something. It's Netanyahu who wants this war with Iran. It's Israel's military intelligence apparatus. And the US military is functioning as their proxy in this case. So I expect war. I wouldn't be shocked if these negotiations fail. And a war with Iran would be potentially devastating for the region, for the global economy. There's no reason for it at all. From an American point of view. I mean, from the point of view of a realist American point of view. Very quickly, I wanted to touch on Venezuela. I just heard from a friend who was at a gathering of oil industry executives. I'll be reporting on this a little bit later. It was not an on-the-record meeting, and none of them are particularly interested in going into Venezuela. They consider it an unstable environment. They were not pushing for this. It really was the Gusano industrial complex based in South Florida that, for ideological reasons, wanted regime change in Venezuela, wanted the operation that saw Maduro and Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, the UN-recognized president, and his wife, Celia Flores, kidnapped. And following that kidnapping, Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is the de facto leader of the Gusano industrial complex, announced that the new president, the acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, would do whatever they wanted. So there was no regime change. They just threatened Delcy Rodriguez and the Chavista movement and the PSUV party that controls the government with another military invasion and possibly their own assassinations if they did not pass a new hydrocarbon law invalidating the reforms to the PDVSA state oil company of Venezuela enacted by Hugo Chavez in 2007, and making it possible for the U.S. to serve as a custodian of Venezuela's oil profits in a private account in Qatar held outside the purview of the American public. A very kind of Epstein-like arrangement that's unregulated, corrupt, a slush fund. But the Venezuelan leadership had very little choice here unless they wanted to go to war with the United States again. And they're being promised some kind of sanctions relief. There will be revenue. Delcy Rodriguez was essentially forced to meet with CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who reportedly told her to eject the Russians, to start canceling business deals with Russian companies like Lukoil and Rosneft, which are involved in the Orinoco oil belt, to cancel deals with China around Belt and Road, infrastructure, mining, etc., to deal with the U.S. exclusively at the point of a gun. Newsmax, which is a ratchet right-wing quasi-news propaganda network that answers to the White House and is sponsored by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, run by longtime conservative hatchet man Chris Ruddy, has sent a reporter to Caracas who may be the first to interview Delcy Rodriguez. This will not be journalism. It'll be an interview conducted at the point of a gun, essentially. Literal information warfare. So you have to kind of pity the position that the Venezuelan leadership finds it's in as they try to hold on to the social programs and the communes that they had established starting under Chavez, and to be able to plow some of the revenue that they're going to receive back into the social sector. That's something Delcy Rodriguez has announced she's going to do. But you also have to question what kind of leverage the U.S. regime has over Delcy Rodriguez, which they're using to extract these kinds of major concessions. And one of them, of course, is the threat of military invasion. But I actually think, and I'll be reporting on this hopefully by tomorrow. My schedule's kind of tight, but I've gathered some information on this. I think there's a possibility that the U.S. has a secret indictment of Delcy Rodriguez. And it's the same thing the U.S. has used to twist the arms of Latin American leaders before her. There was also Lenin Moreno, one of the biggest sellouts in Latin American history, who was the vice president of Rafael Correa in Ecuador when the pink tide was at its height, the sort of social democratic pink tide, who sold out Correa and then helped participate in the jailing of Assange, as well as, the jailing of Jorge Glass, the sellout of the entire Correísta movement. They were what was being held over his head were documents demonstrating corruption known as the INA papers, corruption, I think, in the oil sector in Ecuador. And it was eventually released anyway in 2019 after he was leaving the stage. So, they're always going to come out with it. Just like the indictment against Maduro, which also names Diosdado Cabello. So they're using that indictment as leverage against an active minister in the Venezuelan government, Diosdado Cabello. There was a secret indictment of Julian Assange. Remember when Assange was in the Ecuadorian embassy and James Ball from The Guardian, this former WikiLeaks mole, comes out and says, Julian Assange has nothing to fear. When Julian Assange was saying all along, there's a secret indictment, there's a secret indictment. And they called him crazy. They were the secret indictment was authored and introduced in Northern Virginia federal court the day after, or the day that the CIA learned that Julian Assange was planning to escape from the embassy to a third country. So secret indictments are something that the DOJ uses to extract and concessions and control leaders probably around the globe. And I think we need to question if there's one hanging over the head of Delcy Rodriguez, who helped restructure PDVSA to beat sanctions. You know, when you hear, oh, the criminal Delcy Rodriguez, or the crimes of the Venezuelan state, the criminal Venezuelan state, you'll see that in all of these State Department-backed phony journalism groups like OCCRP and Armando Info. The crimes are just them circumventing sanctions, and the sanctions are the real crime. So you set them up with sanctions, and then when they try to circumvent them, as Delcy Rodriguez effectively and masterfully did, actually growing Venezuela's economy under massive sanctions through oil sales, through a ghost fleet, just like Iran has to have. You have to have a ghost fleet of ships to get your oil out, and then you sell it at bargain basement rates to countries like China just to keep your country from collapsing under US sanctions. Then they accuse you of crimes because you're cheating. But the real crime is the sanctions. And who authorized the sanctions? Nobody but the Treasury Secretary. It's not like they go to the UN and go to the UN Security Council, or they go to the UN General Assembly and ask for a vote on sanctions. That doesn't happen. These are unilateral acts of financial terrorism. So now the CIA is coming back to Venezuela. They've announced that. One of the things I think they're going to do is they're going to get their tentacles into PDVSA and look for ways of building up allegations of dirt and crime to continue to twist the arms of the Venezuelan leadership. There's all these rumors being spread that Alex Saab, who also helped circumvent sanctions and helped create the CLAP program that kept Venezuelans fed under sanctions with often free food, free meals. There's rumors that he's been arrested. I've been told by multiple sources that those rumors are false. But, who knows what could be planned. And then the Maria Corina Machado opposition, the radical opposition, which has been iced out by Trump for now, is trying to organize protests and called for the student sector to come out and protest. So they're trying to create destabilization inside Venezuela to make it harder for this government to even govern with the U.S. twisting its arm, which is interesting because the Maria Corina Machado opposition, the radical, formerly State Department-backed opposition, is actually threatening its own relationship with Trump and Rubio here. And why do I think there could be a secret indictment? Well, here's one clue, but I'll introduce more later. I don't like to telegraph punches, but I'm here. This is a quote from David Smild, who they just say is a Tulane University professor who studied Venezuela. But no, this guy's been consulting on regime change for a long time, in addition to, I think, attacking the Grayzone because we got in their way. Just being a leader in a highly corrupted regime for over a decade. Remember, it's highly corrupted because they don't play ball with, they actually circumvent sanctions, and that distorts your state. Makes it logical that she, Delcy Rodriguez, is a priority target for investigation, said David Smild, a Tulane University professor who has studied Venezuela for 3 decades. She surely knows this, and it gives the U.S. government leverage over her. She may fear that if she does not do as the Trump administration demands, she could end up with an indictment like Maduro. So, pretty clear clue there. The DOJ, the Treasury Department, and the Pentagon are teaming up to terrorize Venezuela, but they have not yet achieved regime change. And so it's something to keep an eye on, and we'll be reporting more here at the Grayzone. We have a pretty simple mission. which is to tell you what you are not supposed to know. And so we couldn't be more grateful for your support, especially as we were unblocked by PayPal, which allows us to get revenue from our Rumble stream. And yeah, we're not going to be working with them anymore. To solicit donations, you can support us through a more trusted company or on Patreon, or by subscribing to us on Substack, where you'll get all our content and original investigative reporting in your email box every day. Subscribe to us here on YouTube if you haven't done so yet, so you get alerted to these streams when they happen, whenever they do. This one was pretty impromptu, but Kit Klarenberg really came through as always for us, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks a lot for being with us. Oh, and check out our tribute to the revolutionary life and legacy of Michael Parenti with his son, Christian Parenti. Michael Parenti Presente. Thanks again. See you next week. Peace.